I met yesterday with Department of Health and Department of Ecology. You have a map in front of you. We did provide those to the public also, but they are proposing to move forward with a larger closure area of Oakland Bay and Hammersley Inlet, and also a much larger conditional area. But working with them, I think we came up with some very good solutions yesterday. The problem with this is, you can see on that first map that's got the big red area, the current sanitation line, so basically the open area was basically at Munson Point. That has moved quite a bit further north. And really the reason for that was the lack of dilution from effluent out of the wastewater treatment plant. We're just not getting the flow and the flushing that we thought we were getting out of Oakland Bay. And the problem with that is, if we have a breakdown in disinfection, so with our UV system, if for some reason the power were to go out, power's reduced, the bulbs aren't basically killing any of those norovirus infectious elements that are coming through that the Department of Health does not have time to contact the shellfish harvesters to shut them down. And what they had indicated to us is they need about a 4-hour period. They can work with us, and if we continue to work with them, we could get that down to as little as 2 hours. But right now, they are proposing to move that area. And also, I provided you a list of affected shellfish growers. If you look at that list that is being affected by the actual closure, it's a lot of the Squaxin Island tribe area. So not an ideal situation, but Department of Health and Ecology are going to meet with the Squaxin Island tribe tomorrow. We did reach out to Squaxin Island tribe and ask them if they would like us to attend that meeting for support. They declined that offer and said that they would like to see us maybe at a future meeting, but not tomorrow's meeting. So we'll get a report back on how that goes. But one of the big things that Department of Health had indicated that could move that closure line back to Munson Point, back to the original closure area, was a continuous monitoring of disinfection effectiveness. So basically what they want is it's a probe really to identify the amount of particles that are coming through the UV system. And we have it out at it's a requirement at the satellite wastewater treatment plant. So any satellite wastewater or any plant producing Class A reclaim water, you have to have that disinfection, basically a guarantee that it's working. And you could get a breakdown in disinfection for many different reasons, whether it be an actual outage, it may be old UV bulbs that just aren't putting out enough of that UV light to kill that. Could be many different things. We also came up with everything from discharging, if you remember seeing the slack tide tank, the very big tank down on the bottom level on the right-hand side, diverting, when we do have a breakdown in disinfection, diverting any of that effluent to the slack tide tank, and then treating it with hypochlorite and giving it enough contact time to kill any of those viruses that may be in the water before we actually discharge it into Oakland Bay, which would reduce that closure area. We talked everything from that to, we talked about diverting our effluent up to a discharge well uphill from the site, up on some property that's actually for sale right now. I think we discussed it when we were down taking the tour. But we are working with them, and the first, I guess, line of defense is going to be that monitoring system at the UV site. Unfortunately, that comes with a price tag of about $50,000 to $75,000. So a fairly significant, not a cheap fix moving forward. And unfortunately, that will be with our new permit. That will be a requirement of our new permit. So this is not something that's going to be arbitrary or not be able to be implemented. It will be a requirement moving forward. So we will try and find that money out of the existing budget, but that is going to be something that we did not see coming in 2019 that we will have to look for a budgetary item moving forward.
Greg,
Yes.
the sampling stations, can you explain a little bit what a sampling station is? 'Cause I know you have about 15 altogether.
And those are not our sampling stations. Those are Department of Health
Okay.
Sampling stations. That is where they would go if we had a breakdown in disinfection, and they would actually test the waters.
By hand, manually?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know how long it takes to get the report back on those?
I do not know. No, I do not know. So if you flip to the second page, also one of the things was a larger conditional area. So on that second page, you'll see that kind of mustard looking color right in the middle. That area used to be a green area, which was just an open area. Didn't have any restrictions on it whatsoever. It is a conditional area, and within a conditional area, it really doesn't mean a lot unless we have very high flows or we have a breakdown in disinfection. And they will give those folks enough time that they won't be able to harvest for a certain period of time. That also comes with heavy rainfall. They've had some issues in those areas, so they have made that a conditional area. It does stay open for harvesting unless we have an issue. But just wanted to make you aware of all of these things that are coming. I'm sure that we will hear about it in the future when this does take effect, but I just guarantee you that the wastewater treatment plant staff and myself are working to do everything we can possibly do to reduce that closure area and those conditioned areas within Oakland Bay and Hammersley Inlet. And I would love to try to answer any of the questions that you might have if you do have any.
Just buying that monitor solves the problem?
It doesn't solve, it solves the problem of the closure area expanding. It certainly doesn't solve a problem. I don't know that we necessarily have a problem. It's a closure area. It's an area where you can't harvest shellfish.
But that is an economic
affecting
issue.
18 growers?
Between conditional and closed areas, yes, it's a pretty long list. Mark and I were just kind of looking at it, and the amount of small shellfish growers and likely folks that are depending on that income and that revenue to support not only them but their families. So certainly it's a priority for us.
Well, I guess we can talk about it Thursday or Tuesday, I'm sorry, at study session.
Great. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, couple questions. When was kind of loosely used. What's like the when time frame with this
For
this taking effect?
I think it's going to be fairly quickly. They wanted to meet with not only the city, but the shellfish growers and the Squaxin Island Tribe. Like I said, they are meeting with Squaxin Island Tribe tomorrow. They are trying to get most, if not all, of the growers together. They asked if I would also attend that meeting. I certainly will be attending that meeting. They haven't set it up yet, but they did indicate that it would be in the next few weeks. So I'm guessing sometime just after the first of the year, this will likely take effect.
Okay, wow. Is it all right if I one more?
Yeah, go
So
ahead, Councilman.
has any other consideration been given? Because from our understanding as well, like the sewer basin 3 project, those are creating efficiencies in our sewer network. Does that weigh into some of this decision making as well, or, I mean, does any of the efficiencies gained there help with this, or not really?
No, it's a very interesting situation because that is DOE's portion. DOE and health, from what I saw, don't necessarily work together.
Okay.
Department of Health has their own restrictions. Flow really doesn't matter. We asked them, is there a way that we could reduce that closed area back to the current line during the summer flows? I mean, we're less than 1 million gallons during the summer.
Right.
Very low flows, and asked, is there a way that Squaxin Island Tribe could harvest their land during the summertime, when we know we don't have those? And the answer was no, because still, if you have a breakdown in disinfection, they don't have enough time that effluent wouldn't hit that beach when they're harvesting. So basically, they need, like I said, they need about a 4-hour notification that they can get a hold of those growers, make sure that they're not harvesting those beaches and getting that shellfish out, is what they told us. They did say with some of their better relationships that they have with wastewater treatment plants that they've had, I guess, more contact with, they've gotten that down to about a 2-hour time frame. So not having a ton of contact with Department of Health. They stuck with the 4 hours right now, but they did say, and the willingness to take steps to improve our disinfection. They certainly were, when they left the meeting, said, we will certainly look at the 2-hour time frame and see if we can get that down for you and maybe reduce that closure area. So, but the two entities don't necessarily work together. So the efficiencies and the lower flows didn't really help the actual Department of Health closure area.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
If I recollect, when the new treatment plant was opened, that expanded the available open area in Hammersley Inlet, and that was one of the things that was touted at the ribbon cutting for that event. If we're operating in a similar fashion, what prompted this change, rather drastic change, in this affecting 18 growers?
The dye study. So originally, new technology, really, to answer your question, council member. It was new technology at the time that they did the original dye study, back when we had, I think it was even before the plant was reconstructed. It was done, I want to say, in the early 2000s. And they did a dye study at that time and actually had probes. They didn't have, they were surface water probes. So what they saw in this dye study was most of the dye that went out and the effluent, it sunk to the bottom. And it was done in November. They don't know if that had an effect on it, that the effluent was colder, the water was colder, what the reasoning was for it, but a lot of it sunk to the bottom that they didn't detect in the first dye study that they did a decade ago. On this one, that with new technology, they caught all of that dye that sunk to the bottom and found that it just really wasn't going anywhere. They saw originally that surface flow was moving, but the stuff that was on the bottom that's really going to affect the beaches really isn't moving. It's going out into Oakland Bay and Hammersley, and it's really just flushing back and forth. It's not really moving like they thought it was out of Hammersley. And they pointed to the area of Mill Creek and the point where it really kind of restricts down. And that was kind of the pinch point where it was getting to that point and kind of sticking there and then flushing back in on a high tide. So low tide, it was kind of flushing to Mill Creek, and then high tide, it was flushing right back into Oakland Bay. So really, I guess, lack of better technology and really understanding what was going on out there, a little bit, I think, of misconception is really why the open area was larger. Now that they've, a year ago did this study and have different information, and that was my question. I asked the same exact question, and Department of Health's explanation for that was, this is the latest dye study that we've had. This is the only information that we have to go off of. So we have to use the information that we've got. So unless we could commission them to do another study, which would be fairly expensive, and maybe get some different results, there have been, And Squaxin Island Tribe has brought up ideas also. They talked about moving the outfall pipe, constructing something further down into Hammersley. But then again, we discussed that yesterday, and maybe that helps them out around Munson Point, but maybe that doesn't help the guy out down past Mill Creek, that we're pushing that effluent further down. But even with that being said, it was interesting when I brought up the discharge well and said, let's just say we wipe the treatment plant off the map. We don't discharge to Oakland Bay. Then what's it look like? The whole thing's open? I just assumed that the whole thing would be open at that point. And they said, no, absolutely not. That section would still remain closed. They pointed to working with the marina, which I'm not sure I quite understand. We have a fairly small marina, but they pointed to the boat traffic, and they also pointed to some contaminants that are likely in the water around where, not that it's SPI's issue, it was Simpson back in the day, but obviously things that are in the water out in front of the mill now are having an effect on that closure area. So it's not just the treatment plant, because like I said, I did ask the question, let's just say we completely wipe the plant off the map. What does that do to the closure area? And they did indicate that it would be much smaller, but it would still be there.
So just one other question on that. On this list of 18 growers being affected, do we have any idea how many of those were not previously in the open area? Or how many were opened up the last time that it was expanded? Were all of these previously closed and opened, or are these folks that have always been sitting in the closure area?
So, sorry, I'm not sure that I completely understand.
I don't think I said it very well. So when we had the open area expand, when the wastewater treatment plant opened, how many of the folks on this list were then able to harvest who previously weren't able to? Were these all brand new at that time, or is this something that they were previously in the closed or conditional and are now back in that? Do we know?
I can't answer
Okay,
that.
that's
Yeah,
fine.
I don't know. You can see the lines where the lines were at before, and obviously that opened up on the first map. You can see what was recommended in 93 and what the current line is, and obviously that 93 line excluded a lot of the tribal beaches that are out there. So to answer it any more than that, I just can't at this point. I don't have enough knowledge to speak to that. So we can certainly try and find out, and I'll have a much better idea after meeting with most, or if not all, of these shellfish growers here in the weeks to come. But yeah, at this point, I just can't answer that.
Craig, I have a question on the monitoring. Obviously, they're not testing for certain viruses or like norovirus.
Correct.
They're doing some type of indirect, if something peaks, then they're assuming it's not being treated?
If
Because
we have a break,
they're not doing a full test, water test to see if there's any norovirus, et cetera, in the water. So what are they actually monitoring?
so by health, there is a federal standard that assumes that there are, and I forget the actual number, I apologize, but it's certain parts per million of the virus that is always in sewage. So the federal limits assume that there is always the norovirus within effluent. But the UV and hypochlorite is killing off that. They just need to assure that the UV is effectively killing all of those viruses that are coming through the plant.
But the new monitoring system would not actually be monitoring the viruses.
No, it
what are
actually
they
would be
monitoring?
it would be monitoring the UV light
Okay,
and the turbidity in the effluent. So basically,
So
they would be
indirect
looking
measures
at
of-
the effectiveness
Okay.
of, and the problem is, if you've got UV bulbs out there, they explained it much like a tanning bed. The bulbs apparently, they wear out and they're not as effective at tanning us when we go to a tanning bed, much like they're killing the virus when it's coming through the plant. So anytime you're not changing out those bulbs and you may have a breakdown, not that this would happen at our plant, but they've seen it in other plants where maybe they're trying to be more cost effective and they're trying to hang on to those UV bulbs longer. But basically, it's just measuring the turbidity and the light that's penetrating through that to kill those viruses. That's what the monitoring probe is doing at the UV station.
Okay.
And we've
Thank
also,
you.
we're gonna add redundancy to the UV lights, correct?
That's correct.
So.
But they're
maybe-
still saying that time, what they're worried about is, let's say we have a power outage. We're still flushing effluent into Oakland Bay that may not be fully treated and may not be killing those viruses. And what Department of Health needs, they're saying they need 4 hours from the time that we call them to say, we had a breach in our disinfection system, a failure. We need you to shut the area down. They need enough time to contact those harvesters and those growers to say, we've had a breakdown, we need you to not harvest, and they need 4 hours to do so. So that is really the closure area, is that effective area that within 4 hours, that virus would hit that beach. And that's the reason for that large red area. Anything outside of that red area, they feel that they've got more than 4 hours before it actually reaches that beach.
All right, thank you. Joey?
Yeah, I think this is definitely something we need to, first let Craig, work through the process here, but, we need to get kind of up to speed on it, and I would agree that, bringing this up in a study session would be wise.
Sounds like we're gonna have
In the
to.
near future, as soon
And-
as you can get through what you can get through.
And at that study session, we certainly can invite Department of Health and Department of Ecology, because this is not my world. But yeah, those professionals that are in through Department of Ecology and Health, I think certainly could maybe shed some more light and maybe answer some more of those questions. So if and when we get to that point, I think that might be a really good idea to bring those folks in and maybe be able to ask those questions too also.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like there's an opportunity.
And you're gonna address a budget issue next week. Will we include it, I assume?
I would like to.
I'll
include
work with Sandy and see if we can't, if we're not going to address it within the operations budget, we'll figure out how we get through that.
Okay, thanks, Craig.